Listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, July 21st. We'll be hearing the presentation, Making Communities More Resilient Through Local Mitigation Planning. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call the 1-800 number shown in bold. For your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, again, located in your webinar toolbar. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. I'll just ask that if there's a particular panelist that you would like to answer your question, please indicate so when you are asking your question. Coming up on your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2017. Thanks to all the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible. Today in particular, we are being sponsored by the Sustainable Communities Division and the Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Divisions. You can learn about both of those by heading over to planning.org/divisions, and we'll hear a little bit more about these divisions in a few moments. On your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. You can register for these by visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, head over to planning.org and log into your MyAPA account, and then there you can search for CM activities. Either enter the event number or the title of today's webcast, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And today's webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education credit, and you can check those out again on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions and when our sessions are posted to YouTube and PDFs are available. And with that, we are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/planningwebcast. We'll also have a PDF available at the end of the presentation on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. With that, I am going to now turn it over to Jenny Koch of the Sustainable Communities Division to kick off today's presentation. Jenny, it is all you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Just wanted to give some intro information about the division. The APA Sustainable Communities Division supports planners who are committed to planning for sustainable communities by integrating all aspects of sustainability into our work through the combined economic, social, and ecological factors that shape our communities. We have many sponsors that help us do a lot of great things, including putting on these webinars. Our sponsors this year include Clarion, Dewberry, Farr Associates, HEF, Niche Engineering, Robinson & Cole, Smith Group JJR, U.S. Green Building Council, CDP Engineers, Montgomery Associates, Tesca, and TransformativeTools.org. So thank you again for your sponsorship. Before we talk about this webinar today, I just wanted to let you know that we have another upcoming webinar on August 23rd. We are co-hosting this with the APA Massachusetts chapter. And for this webinar, we'll be talking about a health impacts assessment that a group of members from the Sustainable Communities Division worked on. They partnered with Groundwork Lawrence in Massachusetts to do this volunteer service project. So they worked together with residents to conduct this HIA to analyze the potential health benefits of street tree planting in the city. And so for the webinar, the speakers will provide an overview of the Green Streets Program Health Impact Assessment process, and will give a summary of their findings, recommendations, and the resources that they developed. So please join us for that webinar. If you have ideas for other webinars or other things you think the division should be doing, please share them with us. Here's our contact information. You may be interested to head to our blog where you can sign up for our bi-weekly email bulletin, which is chock full of information about the latest news and events related to sustainable communities. So for today's webcast, we are seeking to strengthen the ties between hazard mitigation planning and other local planning and regulatory land use processes. So our speakers today will provide practical steps on how to integrate hazard mitigation strategies into local plans, such as comprehensive and functional plans, and will show where hazard mitigation can fit into zoning and subdivision codes. And they'll provide some effective strategies and methods for incorporating mitigation to local plans. So we have three speakers. The first speaker, Shannon Burke, is an urban planning professional with more than 20 years local land use and comprehensive planning experience with specialization in hazard mitigation planning and long-term disaster recovery. She has worked for the City of New Orleans Mayor's Office, the City Planning Commission, and surrounding communities in the greater New Orleans area in planning and government administration. She is currently the manager of APA's Planning Hazards Center and is an executive board member of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association and has served in leadership roles with the Metro New Orleans American Planning Association. Pardon me. Our second speaker, Lawrence Frank, is a certified floodplain manager for Atkins North America, where he serves as resilience program manager. With 23 years experience in hazard mitigation and disaster recovery, he has an extensive background in assisting federal, state, tribal, university, and local officials in increasing resilience and reducing risk to natural and man-made hazards. Mr. Frank is currently part of the Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Division of APA. He's a participant in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Community Resilience Panel and leads the planning committee for the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association. Our final speaker, Allison Hardin, works for the City of Myrtle Beach as a city planner. Her 25-year career includes experience with regional and urban planning, GIS mapping and coordination, floodplain management, hazard mitigation planning, business operations, and emergency services. Allison is currently the chair-elect of APA's relatively new Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Planning Division, again, who is the co-sponsor of today's webinar. So with that, I'll pass it on to Shannon to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Christine and Jenny, for the introductions and for helping us put this on. I welcome everyone to this webinar, Making Communities More Resilient Through Mitigation Planning. This presentation is the Natural Hazard Mitigation's flagship initiative called the Disaster Risk Reduction Curriculum. This planning module is one of 24 modules developed by experts in the field, and it can be delivered in person or on the web. The 24 modules fall under 4 categories that are able to help communities integrate disaster risk reduction in their communities. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. Just note that there are several recorded presentations on NHMA's website that you can go to find these, to find more information about these, the disaster risk reduction curriculum. Okay, so what's covered today? I'm going to talk to you about what brought me into the field of hazard mitigation first, and why I think that hazard mitigation and hazard mitigation planning is the best defense against disaster impacts and hazard vulnerability. And I'm going to give you a few sobering statistics first about the impact of disasters in the U.S. As you know, there are multiple planning fields like land use and transportation planning. Mitigation planning is an emerging field in planning, and like all of these fields, hazard mitigation has esoteric terminology not understood by all. So I'm going to spend a few minutes giving definitions that you may or may not be familiar with. After my portion of the presentation, Lawrence is going to talk about integrating hazard mitigation into local government planning and discuss resources and identify best practices. He'll close with barriers to mitigation, integration, and provide solutions that you can use. After Lawrence, Allison will talk about mitigation from a local perspective, discussing challenges and solutions that she's used to advocate for mitigation planning concepts and mitigation planning concepts as a practicing planner. Like you, she's on the front lines, and through her local experience, she has become a strong advocate of mitigation and mitigation planning, and I look forward to what both of them have to say. At the end, I'll let you know where you can find out more information about natural hazard mitigation's disaster reduction curriculum and how to join our organization. Following that, I hope that you will have some questions for us. Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears and discuss what brought me into the field of hazard mitigation. I'm from New Orleans, and my family was impacted by Katrina. Prior to Katrina, I was a local land use planner and regularly received development proposal where unsafe development was proposed. In my interaction with developers and city planning commissioners, I didn't have the tools to effectively make recommendations for safe development, and I didn't even know how to use the ones I had. Elected and appointed officials weren't aware that pumps would become overextended and cease working if there was a disaster, and this is what happened in New Orleans. There wasn't even an awareness of preparing for disasters, especially about what could happen. When people evacuated the city, many thought that they would be away for a few days until the storm subsided. We all know that it took many months for people to return to their homes, and still 10+ years later, the city is still recovering. It was in the aftermath of Katrina, where I worked on recovery for FEMA, that I was introduced to hazard mitigation planning. The principles, concepts, and regulations make perfect sense to me as a planner, and I knew that other planners might think that as well. So such was born an entire career that has been fueled by providing planners like you with the means of advocating for mitigation in your community. As someone who considers herself a mitigation planner, sometimes I get overwhelmed with the statistics and the impact of hazard events on people, like Vera Smith, seen in the photo here. She died in the aftermath of Katrina, and she was buried in a makeshift grave by her neighbors on her front lawn. It is images like this that still haunt me and underscore the importance of educating planners about solutions, about mitigation. It's not perfect, but mitigation is the best defense we have against disasters. Okay, so now for the sobering statistics. As we all know, our climate is changing and disasters are increasingly more deadly and more costly. This is a graphic by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It depicts $15 billion weather and climate disasters that occurred last year. Last year was an unusual year with 15 weather and climate events with losses exceeding $1 billion each across the U.S., and all those types of disasters are depicted in the graphic. Like you see, multiple hazard types occurred, like wildfire and inland flooding. So mitigation, it's multi-hazard. Although since flooding is the most common hazard, that's the one that's really talked about the most. In total, these 15 events last year led to nearly 140 deaths and caused $46 billion in total direct costs. This doesn't include indirect costs, which really impact you at the local level. Losses like sales, wages, and profits due to loss of business functioning and people not being able to get to work. Indirect costs are have multiple or ripple effects. And this doesn't include the impacts on vulnerable populations like the elderly, who are the most vulnerable and suffer the greatest. Unfortunately, 2016 is following the same pattern, where there has been rapid succession of disaster events. Since July 7th, there have been 9 weather and climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each across the U.S. You hear about them in the news for a few days, and then when the community begins to rebuild, you don't hear too much about it anymore. But hopefully, people in those communities are starting to use that window of opportunity to rebuild smarter, safer, and stronger. Okay, so I'm sorry, but we have to do the definitions now. Hazard mitigation, some of you may be vaguely familiar with hazard mitigation, and some of you may have participated in the development of a mitigation plan in your community. The fact is, community planners have an integral role as advocates in shaping their communities. Tools that are the mainstay of the planning professional, like building codes, zoning, and land use plans, are keys to mitigation. However, unless the public understands that we need to change where and how we develop and live, this work won't matter. Therefore, better communication, citizen involvement, and proactive leadership set the priorities, tone, and attitude for development decisions. Experience has also shown that emergency managers continue to take the lead on addressing hazards in their communities. Frequently, emergency managers lead mitigation planning efforts, but may not always take advantage of the unique expertise that community planners can bring as these plans are developed. We recommend that wherever possible, you get involved in this process. FEMA defines mitigation as any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property resulting from hazards. Just so you know, this is different from climate mitigation, which is how the international community defines mitigation. In general, this relates to reduction in greenhouse gases. Climate change, however, increases the impact of disasters as well as hazard vulnerability. Many of you have heard of or are directly impacted by sea level rise. In the international community, increasingly in the U.S., disaster risks reduction, mitigation, and hazard resilience, which I'll define in just a minute, are used interchangeably. However, there are differences between the three definitions. For now, they're generally used the same. So mitigation builds community resilience and community sustainability and offers the opportunity to lower our risks across generations over the long term to ensure that our communities recover more quickly from those natural events when they do occur. I want to mention that a key point is that Natural Hazard Mitigation Association I'll start over. I want to mention that a key point is that the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association makes in its disaster risk reduction curriculum is the use of higher standards linked with demographics to prevent externalization of the cost of disaster events. Building homes and building outside of high-risk flood areas, retro and fortifying buildings against earthquakes, constructing safe rooms for our neighbors, our friends, and our families to shelter in during high wind events are all examples of steps planners can take in their community. FEMA defines hazard mitigation as the process used by state, local, and tribal leaders to understand risks from natural hazards and develop long-term strategies to reduce the impact of disasters on people, property, and the environment. There are multiple definitions of resilience. I like to use the National Academy of Sciences definition, which is a community's ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, and recover from, and more successfully adapt to hazard events. The term resilience has grown in prominence and use over the past several years, but generally, planners will recognize the intersection of sustainability and smart growth with resilience, risk reduction, and mitigation. So a lot of people don't know this, but weather and climate are different things, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. Just want to mention that weather is short-term conditions of the atmosphere. The average daily weather for an extended period of time at a certain location is climate. And when we talk about climate change, we talk about changes in long-term averages of daily weather. Although the solution seems insurmountable, you're in a position as a planner to use available tools to make a difference, however small, however big. Both Allison and Lawrence's presentations will discuss climate and sea level rise and how mitigation can be used. Just so you know, when you implement mitigation measures in your community, what you are engaging is climate adaptation. Therefore, you are able to call yourself a climate adaptation specialist as well as a mitigator and as well as a planner. And this presentation can help you do those things. Okay, now I'd like to bring your attention to the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. It's landmark legislation that brought hazard mitigation into clear view and helped to define it in terms of what can be understood nationwide. It was preceded by a series of national laws and federal programs dealing with mitigation. The Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 institutionalized hazard mitigation planning, both as a model process and as a condition for receipt of federal hazard mitigation grant funds. The overall intent of DMA is to prevent losses by building more resilient communities and its primary tool is the use of financial incentives. DMA is intended to facilitate cooperation between state, local, and tribal governments and encourages them to work together to apply strategies for disaster resilience at the local level. As of April 1st of 2017, all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 territories have FEMA-approved state mitigation plans. That means that more than 22,000 local governments have a current FEMA-approved or approvable pending adoption local mitigation plan. There are about 150 tribal governments with current mitigation plans. Just so you know, in the graphic, the dark green indicates adopted mitigation plans. The light green shows plans in the process of being adopted, and red shows expired plans. So this map highlights the process of developing a mitigation plan and having it approved by FEMA and the state. Over 81% of the nation's population live in communities with current mitigation plans, making them eligible to receive and apply for mitigation rebuilding dollars. A FEMA-approved mitigation plan is required as a condition for applying for and or receiving non-emergency disaster funds. Do you remember New Orleans' well-publicized post-Katrina recovery problems? New Orleans didn't have a plan in place, and once they had the mitigation plan in place, it was not adopted by the city council. I worked for Katrina Recovery, and I actually went to the city, picked up and hand-delivered their adoption papers and bringing them back to FEMA, therefore helping in New Orleans recovery efforts. What you see in front of you is FEMA's local plan review guide. Just keep in mind as you develop your mitigation plan, it's what FEMA uses to review plans against regulation. It also talks about the plan approval process, which I recommend becoming familiar with, so your community has a plan in place should a disaster strike. There are numerous resources to help communities develop mitigation plans, but I suggest starting at the source to make sure your community is going in the right direction. And when I say the source, I mean FEMA's has a mitigation planning website. I suggest using the local mitigation plan handbook, which is on the right, and the local mitigation plan review guide on the left together. This is the contents of the local mitigation planning handbook. I pulled these directly from the handbook. The local mitigation planning handbook combines the guide that FEMA uses to review plans. It combines them in this book. So the local mitigation plan review guide, it's linear, following the regulations. And the local hazard mitigation handbook follows the planning process, which, as you know, is complex and variable and not linear. Very quickly, I'd like to talk about the regulations in a nutshell. On the left are required elements, and on the right are the required sub-elements. These are the things that are required in a hazard mitigation plan. In general today, Allison and Lawrence in particular are going to talk about element A, the planning process, which is sub-element 4, which discusses incorporating existing plans, studies, and reports, and technical information in the plan. And they're also going to talk about element C, 6, mitigation strategy, and that is, does the plan describe a process by, they're going to discuss this whole section, basically, elements 1 through 6. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so this is, these are resources by the American Planning Association. I just kind of wanted to cover these real quick. When I first started in mitigation planning, there were very few resources and no one really knew where to find them. This is just a sampling of books that APA has developed over the years that help you implement and develop your mitigation plan. So these are available for free now by APA. You're able to get them off their website, and so I'd recommend that you go and do that. We also have, and now I work for APA, so I just got this job. This is my 3rd week. So I want to mention some of our current projects. We're working with NHM, we're working on climate science, building coastal resilience through capital improvements planning, resilient transit systems, and we also host our own webinars. It's called the Planning Information Exchange webinars, and we go through those a lot. We have 4 a year. We have a blog. We also record and save our webinars online. We have videos and many, many more things. So if you look up APA Hazards Planning Center, it will take you to our page. Okay, so again, I'm going to talk about a couple of FEMA publications. There are 4 categories of mitigation actions in mitigation. There's local planning regulations, structure and infrastructure, natural systems protection, and education and awareness programs. An example of a local planning and regulations action that can be implemented is the community requiring freeboard. So if you think about a ship, freeboard is the height of the ship's side between the water line and the deck. So if the water goes above the deck, then it would flood. So the National Flood Insurance Program administered by FEMA requires the lowest floor structures to be built at or above what's called the base flood elevation. So a structure built with freeboard would have its lowest floor 1 foot below the BFE so that flooding is less likely. Adding freeboard will reduce NFIP insurance premiums from your community, and we always encourage your community to add even more freeboard than FEMA requires or asks for. Okay, the next one, structure and infrastructure. An example is to retrofit water supply systems. You can develop new or upgrade existing water delivery systems to eliminate breaks and leaks. It's a very, something that can be done locally that FEMA you don't have to get FEMA grant money for. Natural systems protection. You can enhance landscaping and design measures by encouraging drought-resistant landscape design through measures such as incorporating drought-tolerant practices into landscape ordinances. Also, green infrastructure methods are also very useful as well. So for education and awareness programs, it's essentially outreach plans and risk communication. So all of these are part of what you do as a local planner to promote hazard mitigation in your community. So one example of education and awareness is, essentially to create an outreach plan and involve the whole community in your plan. And that means as the process of developing the plan goes on, you get more and more people involved so people understand risk, specifically on their own property or nearby, where they work, where they drive. If they have to evacuate, is that safe? So one thing I want to mention about best practices for outreach is to consider authentic participation. Think about interwoven equity, such as environmental justice and protecting vulnerable populations, and also think about protecting those people who are the most vulnerable. So disasters can happen at any time and any place. Their human and financial consequences are hard to predict. And it's important to understand that only about 50% of events in the U.S. trigger federal assistance. That means that the communities it's up to them, up to you to help your own recovery. So just keep in mind that that's best accomplished when based on a comprehensive long-term plan developed before a disaster strikes. The goal of risk reduction is to reduce the life and property, which includes structures and future construction. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lawrence. One moment, please.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
If you can just, yep, you got it. Swap presenter. Thank you.
All right. Is that working? Okay, cool. Okay, well, thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it. Just so everyone knows, I am a planner by education, but I have spent most of my career from the emergency management side of things, starting at FEMA, and then now working for a consultant that works a lot with FEMA. And, you know, as Shannon said, there's mitigation plans that FEMA does, and all along, the goal has been to better to widen that network and get planners more involved. And really, planners to me tend to be the missing link in this process. Planners understand, you know, disasters involve many cross-cutting issues. Risk is present everywhere. Like every structure, infrastructure has some level of risk. Obviously, some is higher. Planners oversee a lot of the built-in, you know, how the built environment, the blueprint of it. So planners are kind of that sustained group that really is involved, where emergency managers tend to come and go as disasters do. So part of what I want to say, kind of as a thesis, is that planners really need to be involved in this. It's actually very interesting. It can be combined with other issues like sustainability. A lot of this involves redevelopment. You can make these projects that involve risk reduction multi-objective. Water bodies are nice places to spend recreation areas. So if you have to move people away from a water body because it's high risk, well, that can be a great greenway. So there's lots of options, but I think it's real important that planners get involved. So what really we want you to come away with too is to see that hazard mitigation and resiliency are really should be woven into community planning and really kind of present in all types of planning decisions and investments in new construction. Sometimes we have to go back and do projects to kind of retrofit older development because it just wasn't built either with any kind of regulation or any knowledge that, you know, the area would grow and it'd be at higher risk. So there's that, but there's also zoning, building codes that will influence future development. So you all play an important role there. And I think you can see, like I went to the APA conference, national conference this year, you can definitely see many resilience themed presentations there. So I definitely think the gap between emergency managers and planning is much narrower. And I think there's a lot of great examples of how it's been combined. Okay, so real quickly, so the theme again is integrating emergency management, because the FEMA money tends to funnel down to the emergency managers with the planners. So again, looking at, I look at it kind of two ways. You need to know what the hazard, you need to know about the hazard, specifically what it's affecting, how much, and then you need to know, you need to have a good people network involved. You need to have your planning framework, which is your collection of plans, policies, codes, and programs that guide development in your community, factor in what the risk is. So you need to be able to understand what the risk is, depict it, especially like flooding, it's very geographic oriented, and then you need to have it inform these planning processes. So again, effective integration occurs when it leads to community development patterns where the risk is not increased once it's developed, or redevelopment that reduces the risk to known hazards. Okay, just some factors that go into this. Again, strong intergovernmental coordination. A lot of these programs, things that, like I said, it's a cross-cutting issue. You may need, if you're a coastal area, someone who does with coastal management. You may need, you know, your permitting person. You may need your you will need your building official, your planner, your emergency manager. You'll also need support from your community leadership, so your elected officials, your executive leaders. But I would add to this, those leaders kind of that are local champions. They may be from the Rotary Club, but they understand issues that are important to the community. They can get out and drive it. But also, you know, think of the public. If the public is more educated about it, they're likely to demand more action. So again, you also need an understanding of the risks and where you can map that and portray it so people understand it the better. If you can show, simulate, scenarios in the future so they better understand what the impacts could be. And then this information needs to be actionable. So you need to be able to do something with it. And then that's where, understanding the benefits of mitigation is really avoiding a future event or reducing it. And then, you look at incentives for hazard mitigation and community planning. And I'll get to that on my next slide. So some of it's financial. Like I said, every community has to insure their building somehow. A lot of it's self-insured. So that means they could be carrying a pretty heavy financial load if something happens. So it's a way to reduce that exposure. You may get some credit from what is insured from your insurance company. FEMA has a great program, the community rating system, that is affiliated with flood insurance that can do that. So, and we're hoping that bond rating companies get more involved with this. Regulatory, statutory mandates, those are building codes, zoning that help guide it. And then resource incentives can be like technical assistance to help communities determine what they should do or how they should do it. So for me, it's better to sort of show how different ideas of how this has been implemented to kind of help showcase it. And so kind of move from the theoretical now to some real life examples of how different communities have approached resilience and mitigation. So again, this is kind of an overview where you can integrate mitigation goals, objectives, and actions through all the relevant elements in a local comprehensive or general plan. You see a picture of Berkeley's, City of Berkeley, California's local mitigation plan. They've actually done that with their comprehensive plan, introduced a distinct element. I think it's the safety element. So again, mitigation needs should be considered in all community plans and investments. Sometimes it may be like, hey, there's a low risk here, we're not gonna really change what we're doing. But sometimes it may be, hey, let's elevate that highway 2 feet higher, because we know, looking at future risks, climate change, sea level rise, this risk is only getting worse. Or maybe let's not put it there at the beginning, from the start, and reload, put it somewhere else. So I'd like to see it woven into things, kind of like fire safety is. Okay, so a few ones where I've worked on with these communities. Long Beach was severely impacted by Sandy. It was not expecting an event that large, but took on a serious effort to relook at how they do their planning and how they're going to try to rebuild and redevelop. So they got funding through the state from HUD, and this was a locally driven, state-guided process. But the main takeaway was a lot of different ways they approach mitigation and resiliency, from trying to protect areas where there are many homes that were vulnerable, to looking at protecting critical infrastructure, to improving their emergency services. But one of the key takeaways is, once this plan was finished, which was about 1.5 years after the event, they rolled this into their comprehensive planning update. So things that were still needing to be done moved forward into another planning process. And that's the other thing we want to emphasize, that planners can help sustain these ideas and these processes better in some ways than from the emergency management point of view. So the other thing they are looking at as they redevelop key parts of their city that are older, they're looking at, we're going to incorporate resilience as a big feature, as well as sustainability. Okay, so another example where the driver was a large disaster event, Colorado Springs. They are right next to the mountains. They experienced a very severe fire about 5-6 years ago. So not only did they decide they looked at the cause of the fire, which was more embers being carried by wind rather than the fire line. They changed their building code for roof design so it would not catch fire as easily. So that was one result. But they also looked at the fact that when you have a fire, it changes the hydrology in the area. The vegetation's gone. There's more flow of flooding. There's debris. They did projects to stem the flow and dissipate the energy, but they also let people know they're at higher risk. And there was a large uptick in policy purchases. So flood insurance policy purchases. So the big takeaway here too is good engagement after the event. There was a nonprofit that was formed to kind of guide this. Planners played a big role, fire department, and it, I think, was successful in reducing the risk as much as possible and keeping people informed. My next example, North Carolina, I was just working in this area after Matthew. They already had a resilience plan going into it, and the city of Fayetteville was in the process of adopting a resiliency element into their comprehensive plan. So again, we walked into that, and that was great. They were already, so we could kind of build off that with the recovery plan that we were doing. And just one of the big takeaways there is areas that grow fast, as you all know, have a lot of paved areas. They're more prone to events like extreme weather, high rainfall events. So one of the things that Cumberland and Fayetteville are looking at is low development impact principles. And they actually have a great case study right next to them in Fort Bragg, one of the largest military bases, that they weren't getting the same kind of flood damage from kind of more frequent events, not the Hurricane Matthews, due to the fact that they had adopted some of the low impact development principles. At a state level, this is an example of Louisiana, which has a very difficult time with climate change, because a low-lying wetlands area that's also prone to erosion, severe erosion, and a lot of man-made changes have contributed to that. But they have a larger plan that involves pretty big investment of dollars to rebuild some of those areas, but they're also looking at non-structural measures like elevation and some structural measures. So they're looking at a mixture of options. But the other thing too is they're really working with parishes to say, hey, you need to control some of your own destiny, and look at your comprehensive plans as a way to do that as a blueprint for building resiliency. Just a couple more examples. Broward County, Florida, one of the big things here is they put sea level rise impacts into their mitigation plan, but they also, so they're looking at future risk, but they also looked at ways to integrate mitigation into comp plans for the local communities within Broward County. They also looked at incorporating mitigation principles into their recovery plan, because there's lots of good opportunities if you're prepared. But also they reached out to facilities management, risk management, again, looking at, capital improvement budgets. Let's incorporate some more protection there. We can get some insurance credit. We can get a better discount. We can reduce our exposure. So roll it into that ongoing community decision-making process. And then this is just a quick example of a place, Rhode Island, in their planning for land use where they're considering future development conditions. So they're making decisions about today's investments and zoning based on where they're likely to build out to, and what the risk conditions may be at that time. So there may be more development in floodplains, so they have more risk. So real quickly, just want to say there's like Shannon mentioned, there's resources for plan integration. This is a FEMA document. It's online, available online. It helps walk you through the process. I won't spend a lot of time with it right now, but it helps you, kind of take what we've talked about at a high level and implement it. So again, collaborating across different departments. We all know we all kind of work a little bit in silos of excellence, but where you can reach across the line and figure out where do we have something in common on these things. We were able to find that in Broward County. We reached across. Facilities management thinks about risk more than I think most people realize. So just reach out to them, go to lunch, whatever it takes. APA has been a great partner. They developed several documents. Shannon referred to them. This is another one that specifically deals with integration. And again, looking at the different goals, you can see kind of echoes what I've talked about. So look at your future development areas, existing development, redevelopment. You may need to do some retrofit to strengthen and resist hazards. And again, kind of see these are steps, but they're not always linear, being opportunistic. Disasters happen to be, you know, in a way, a big opportunity to deal with this. They're unfortunate circumstances, but they kind of usually kickstart it. But, you know, maybe an extreme event is a time to really sit down and talk about it. Places like Miami Beach are dealing with this on a, you know, very frequent basis now with these king tide events that are, you know, causing a lot of disruption, is more so than damage, but they are, you know, impacting the way, you know, daily life. So again, this is kind of echoing things earlier. It's a multi-group process. And one thing we want to emphasize is that recovery, it's not a good time to start thinking about recovery after the storm. You know, you may find yourself in that situation, but the more you can do ahead of time, FEMA has a document to help with that. The better to drive those relationships that are necessary to do, you know, successful endeavors after a storm. And there's another document, this principle, ASFPM, talks about no adverse impact, principle of, you know, you take an action in the floodplain, it should not adversely impact your neighbors, upstream, downstream. So, you know, these are good principles too. It's ways, has a lot of good information for planners on how to do that. So let me just wrap up with talking about some of the barriers you're going to run into, and you may have already run into them, but, you know, I would look at them as temporary usually. This is a difficult subject sometimes, maybe just because it just doesn't bubble up as one of the highest priorities with a lot of other things in front of people. I think that is where, as a planner, you can kind of see, you know, look for your first couple opportunities, just start a basic network that discusses this. There are lots of good conferences now, not just planning, but your local floodplain management or your state floodplain management group. The Natural Hazard Mitigation Association, as Shannon and I are both very involved with that, is a great place. Places where you will get support, ideas. I think, you know, we fully recognize not one size fits all. It's going to vary in different communities. You may have different ways to approach it, but really, it's going to start with your networking. You may have to build in the framework better, but try to find that common element that you share, whether it's, you know, risk reduction with your risk management group, emergency management's continually looking to ways to reduce risk. You don't want to put new development and have it be, you know, a place where people are getting flooded in 5 years. So, you know, start there, and then, you know, I think in plans where you can insert it. You know, the building up political will may take some time, but I think you can start, you know, in the middle with the people running different departments. So to kind of wrap this up, my part of it, you know, again, figure out what's going on in your community. Figure out what the recurring issues are. You know, also it may be something, there was an underlying bigger risk that could happen. Obviously, earthquakes in California. So, you know, there are different types of impacts from hazards and different risk levels. So, you know, start with a couple hazards and see what can be done there. Again, bringing this to the attention of local leaders, you know, a sympathetic ear, even if it's not an elected official, someone who is influential in the community and well-known, that's a good place to bring this to their attention. Make it a multi-objective approach. Again, when you're looking at a future park, look at an area that's got a lot of vulnerability land and see if that's a good option. Take that out of the development area and have it be something that's important to the community, and maybe that's the highest and best use of that. So, you know, these are just our recommendations. Implement, again, a sustained holistic approach. This is where planners can really help. Emergency managers, again, tend to come in, they got a job to do, they got to get out, they're under the pressure to get done, they may have another emergency to deal with. Planners kind of weave in that yearly, annual process of looking at what's going on in the community. And I will say there are lots of great resources. We've just touched on some: federal government, nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, groups like APA and NHMA for sort of the thought leadership and practices, but foundations too. So that concludes my bit of the presentation, and I will send it over to Allison.
Okay, can everybody hear me? And can you see my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon, or good morning if you're still in the morning time. I'm Allison Harden. I'm a planner with the City of Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. As they said when I was introduced, I do have a history of working with both emergency services and in local planning. I am a CFM, and these are some of some tips and tricks, some things that I've encountered here at our offices, and also in talking to other planners, because I have an experience as being the coastal co-chair for the Association of State Floodplain Managers, and am the chair-elect of the Hazard Mitigation Disaster Recovery Division at APA. I have a lot of opportunity in talking to other groups about what they go through in integrating hazard mitigation into local planning. There'll be a tad bit of overlap with some of my points that Frank just brought up, and I don't want it to be hitting it too hard on the head, but there are some really good points about barriers, overcoming barriers, that I'll touch on that you might have already heard a little bit from Frank. I do want to go ahead and say up front that we do have a lot of, let's see if there we go. Do have a lot of acronyms in this profession, I'm sure you're aware of, so I wanted to remind you of some that I may be mentioning here during the presentation. I also want to say during this slide that the opinions that I have here are mine, that I occasionally am a little forward and frank with my opinion, and I hope that you'll understand it comes from a point of having been there, done that, and I'd like to share with you as honestly as I can about some of the challenges that we've seen and heard from others. So a lot of planners, when they discuss with me about integrating hazard mitigation into planning, they have no idea where to start. I have had somebody say, well, what if I do all this good stuff and nothing happens? Well, great. If nothing happens to your community the next time there's an event, that's fabulous. We haven't experienced several storms here in Myrtle Beach over the decades, and the last two we had, Hurricane Joaquin funneled water into our area in 2015, and we were hit by Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and we actually sustained a significantly less damage than we anticipated because of some of the programs we put into play. So it's been very nice to be able to say, yeah, it may actually mean that nothing big happens as far as damages. So when we talk about to other planners about where you start with basic challenges, there's some areas that are particularly sticky for some planners to get involved with, so I wanted to address those. How do you get public interest into the topic that you're talking about? Or how do you form partnerships? What opportunities do you have, and how do you take those opportunities? And sometimes the answer is very carefully. Political will, how do you build it? That's also something that is we have to deal with on a daily basis, whether we like it or not. And then what resources are available? As Frank has illustrated, there's several resources available to planners, and I'll go into a couple more as well. But I would really love for it if you left this webinar knowing that there's a lot of support for you out in the internet and out in the professional cycles, and we're here to help. Generating public interest for what you're trying to do is sometimes difficult, especially if your community has not had a storm in a long time. You know, I've got 99 more years on this 100-year flood. We flooded last year. I'm good to go. No, sir, that's not how it goes. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Let's talk about the truth about the floodplain here. With the Planning Commission opportunities, because as a planner, I work directly with the Planning Commission, there are several opportunities we have to provide information to those decision makers and recommendation bodies, like training opportunities. In the state of South Carolina, the state chapter of the APA had the law amended in our state law that appointed bodies have to have 3 hours of continuing education training per year. And those are appointed bodies like the Planning Commission, the Boards of Architectural Review, the Boards of Zoning Administration, all the appointed boards. Of course, the elected officials aren't in that list, but they may have their own regulations. But we take those training opportunities when we can. Before we had that law in the state of South Carolina, our meetings were set up 2 per month, once as a workshop and once as a meeting for holding votes. And in the workshop environment, not only did we use that time to discuss in depth some of the topics that were coming up, we took an opportunity to help pass on information that we had received through either conferences that we attended or meetings, or just general even information that we had learned on webinars or through reading. We would make reports during those workshops. Anytime you have those folks gathered together in a room is a good time to help bring their knowledge level up on certain topics. And of course, with hazard mitigation touches us all. So it's a good point. The discussion items. We have an item on our Planning Commission agenda called discussion items. And it is something where you can bring up an item during a meeting after the voting section is gone, where things can be brought up for discussion. These ideas can be brought up from the public or can be brought up from the Planning Commission or for the staff. So if you don't have an opportunity to have a workshop in the month, maybe you have an opportunity to have an extra 15 to 30 minutes at the end of a meeting to discuss things that might be of interest to the planning commissioners or to the public in general. And then not just workshops for the Planning Commission, but workshops for staff and for the public. Invite your planning commissioners to every meeting that you have available, especially if you have planning commissioners that are in the retiree mode. We have several retirees on our board, and they're looking for things to do. God bless them, and we are actually happy to give them as much as we can on that. We really want to help them build up their knowledge base so that they're underpinning their decisions with good practices and facts. Then with helping to drive interest from the general public, a lot has been said about social media. A lot of people are like, oh, well, that's social media, that's somebody else's job. Actually, it's all of our jobs. One of our floodplain managers from out west, Wesley Shaw, he made a presentation several years ago, and he made a line. He said something about social media that got my attention. He said, well, when you think about going to fish, do you go to fish in a dry creek bed or do you go to fish in the ocean? There's over 2 billion people on Facebook. Why would you fish for your audience somewhere that they're not? More than likely, your audience is on Facebook or Instagram or some other type of social media. So if you're not in the social media game, you need to get there in some way, shape, or form. And there are classes available to you, especially from groups like I work for. Just to be clear, I work for the NDPTC, which is a National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, as a contract instructor occasionally. And they have a course called Social Media for Emergency Response that's at no charge to the community that it goes to. There are other groups that also have trainings on social media. I've seen webinars through APA on social media and public outreach, or maybe part of your public outreach programs, going into the next bullet point, involves going out to the public in another way. Piggyback onto whatever outreach programs you are able to do so. If you are an MS4 community under the NPDES program and you have to have outreach on water quality, there's nothing that says you can't also make part of that outreach touch the issues of hazard mitigation in your community. If you have to do outreach for the community rating system and CRS for your floodplain management program, again, there's an opportunity for you to piggyback onto those options. You can do anything from putting brochures into water bills or utility bills, or having a joint media day or a joint public day where you talk about some of the things that meet a lot of requirements for your community. Do you have a recreation department that puts out a newsletter or puts out an email blast? Can you piggyback on that with something that relates to both of them? Finding these partnerships is a great way to get your mission across, but also to save money in the process. Some of the other places where you could have a point of view shown is the FEMA flood map process. If your flood maps are being reviewed, it's a good opportunity to talk about the hazards that come with in the new areas with your community. Again, the NPDES is there, the CRS program. Anytime you're going through a new review with the National Flood Insurance Program, and any public meeting, any city council or county council meeting, any water board meeting, any kind of public board meeting where you have an opportunity to make a linkage between your goal and their goal is an opportunity for you to share that outreach. So in order to share outreach with people, you have to make partnerships. When I first got my CFM and started making my thoughts known in meetings where our Public Works Division was, I did hear one of the people say, "Hey, where'd you get your civil engineer degree? Kmart?" I was like, "Well, yeah, my blue light special was on a sale, as a matter of fact." Just because you don't have a degree in engineering doesn't mean that you can't have 2 cents to say on things that relate to the hazards in your community. Trust your knowledge and work with those folks. That same gentleman that asked me about my blue light special degree is now one of my best coworkers. It took several plates of cookies and lots of time sitting down with him to help him understand where I was coming from, and to ask him to help me figure out how to better serve his department through what I did. But it worked. Also, please make partnerships with emergency services. As Frank outlined, the emergency services folks are often in a hurry and need things done quickly, whereas planners, not that we're not in a hurry, but we like to think about things and like to ponder all the different points. If we have done some of that thinking and pondering ahead of time through the planning process, then we can give them information that they need to make a quick decision. We can be their best friends. We just need to make those connections and reach out to your emergency services folks. Also reach out to your finance people. Making connection with your finance department is extremely important when you're talking about finding funds to implement some of the plans that you have in place for hazard mitigation. There's many different types of ways you can pay for things. You can pay for things jointly through different grant programs. You can use tax increment financing. If your planning commission reviews the capital improvements program like it should, then you have an opportunity there to provide information. But get tied into your finance department. They may also have their hand on the pulse of new things like resilience bonds, financing infrastructure through resilience bonds that are held with a agreement, not agreement, it's underpinned by the insurance in your community. You have to have, you have to be a flood insurance community, and you have to be able to prove the need relates to the protection measure, but how are you going to know that unless you know that those resilience bonds exist? So tie into your finance people. For your external partnerships, your federal agencies, there are a ton of people in federal agencies that are just dying to help you. Their job is to get out there and meet you. So go ahead and look for them as well. It may take you a couple of people to find the right person, but there are many, many folks in the federal agencies that are out there to provide assistance to local governments, and they want to be involved. And this is not when they're bringing the ticket book. This is when they're bringing the help. You can also make friends with developers. I have an intern this year who her takeaway for last week was that, and I apologize if this sounds derogatory, she said that I thought all developers were like vampires, just taking the land and making it their own. But she said not all developers are like that, because she had been introduced to some of the developers we'd worked with over the years who were actively interested in setting aside wetlands and tree areas. So make your partnerships with the developers and find your common ground. For instance, not all developers want to take care of wetlands. Do you have the ability to take that into your park system and make it part of an open space? Do you have the ability to give incentives to maintain open space in the floodplain or in other hazard areas and put density somewhere else, like with the transfer of development rights? Again, lots of options to make a win-win situation with developers and protecting your community. And then with your non-governmental agencies, groups like the Nature Conservancy or your professional groups like NHMA and ASFPM, the Association of State Floodplain Managers, and APA, and other groups that provide assistance to professionals. Again, they're creating content out there that is available to you 24/7 on their websites, and they're developing training that's available to you in person or through the internet. There's so much information out there. It is sometimes a little overwhelming. You do want to find somebody that you can trust to say, hey, I've already swum through the waters here. These are the great places to stop for information, and these are the ones you want to leave aside. Some of the ones that have proven to be really good partners in the past with my community and some other communities are on the screen here. I want to point out a couple of ones you wouldn't necessarily think about. The NSGIC, the National States Geographic Information Council, is not a planning organization. They are specifically the information technology and information data gathering folks, and that's their national professional organization. But when you're making decisions and doing decision-making processes for planning, one of the things you need is data. And so when NOAA partnered with NSGIC and the National Association of Counties and the APA and ASFPM and other agencies to create the Digital Coast Project, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that meant that they had access to the data that each of these groups provided in order to funnel it into better decision-making tools. Wetlands Watch out of Virginia is a really good organization that's got their finger on the pulse of things that are related to wetlands and flooding hazards and wetland preservation. Ducks Unlimited is a place that you don't often think about making a partnership with, but Ducks Unlimited has a great conservation arm that works to provide wetlands for habitats for ducks. Now, I'm not a hunter. I don't have anything against hunters. My dad's one, my brothers are, but it's not my thing. But I still personally give money to Ducks Unlimited so that I can help with the conservation side. And then Firewise, oftentimes when we're talking about natural hazards, we're talking about flood or hurricane or those kind of coastal-based or water-based hazards, but we have wildfires to think about, and we have tornadoes to think about and the like. And the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, has a Wildfire USA program that really helps and can give you guidance on how to incorporate design guidelines for fire resistance into your residential codes. Again, just a really good group of folks here and in other places. So now that you've talking about getting public input, you talked about getting partnerships. Well, what do you do with all of these? Where do you take your opportunities? And when do you take them? When you're talking about during review times for planning items, your pre-development meetings, if you don't take the opportunity to sit down with developers and architects and engineers before they come into your office with an application, then you're kind of missing on a good opportunity to have some sway in what goes on. Have a pre-development meeting. We recently amended our subdivision regulations to require a pre-development discussion with the Planning Commission prior to application for any subdivision of 4 lots or more in the city. Now, again, we're a smaller city, and that might not be a good fit for your community, but it works for us that we get the developer in before the application just to talk with the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission can tell them, okay, I see your tree survey here. I really want you to look at this grove of trees and see what you can do, because the Planning Commission has the ability through the subdivision regs to approve or disapprove the subdivision layout. So it helps the developer not waste time developing something that's going to be turned down by the Planning Commission, and it gives the Planning Commission some word in before the application so that they can communicate directly with the developer. During your policy reviews and rezonings and the like, do you get your staff involved? And I mean, not just the planning staff, but the staff from your entire community. We have a technical review board that was put together several years ago that reviews all of the Planning Commission's activities. And we have a representative from the fire department, public works, the police, the Recreation Division, which has the Parks Department, which takes care of the right-of-ways in our community. So they have to know when things are changing around the right-of-ways, and they look at the tree planting plans. The addressing coordinator, our budget director, all of these people look at these projects before they go to the Planning Commission and provide input directly to the Planning Commission through our staff reports. Sometimes they'll actually recommend, yeah, I recommend that this gets approved, or I recommend that this gets changed. But more often than not, they're giving their points. The fire department will say, you know, the way that this road is designed will make it difficult for our larger trucks to go through. Or the Public Works Division will say, we need to have this water line realigned before this development goes through, or we have a low spot that needs the stormwater system to be improved before this project goes in to avoid flooding. All of that information is extremely helpful to the Planning Commission so that we have a better product in the end when the developer comes through the Planning Commission for their approval. And pre-cons, until it's permitted, it's not permitted. So if you have missed all the other opportunities, do you have an opportunity to speak to the developer during the pre-con to encourage some better practices before they get their permit? Then you have an opportunity after a hazard event occurs. When the impacts are still felt, they're the best time to talk to people about how to prevent the same damage the next time. It's an unfortunate time frame because while the attention is focused on the needs, you do need to handle it with care. People are sensitive about what's happened, and we have, I've had classes in the past where the organizer says, we're going to take advantage of the opportunities after an event. And I'm like, well, take advantage is not a really good word to say. You do need to be careful how you talk to folks after an event. Do remember that these are still folks that are hurting or have lost something, if not someone. And it's not real good to pile on with the regulations right afterwards as far as the emotional side of things. But it is good to be prepared ahead of time to say, if this happens, we need to think about how we're going forward. And that's where your pre-disaster planning goes into play, and having a post-disaster recovery plan, having that ready to go ahead of time, written under blue sky times. It helps to have you move forward. Some of the things that we've used in the past before climate change initiatives came on, the city of Myrtle Beach put lower density zones on the ocean front in 1989. We incorporated what's called a freeboard, or a 3-foot freeboard, meaning that when you're elevating properties in the flood zone, you have to elevate an extra 3 foot above what the FEMA flood insurance maps require. Our state required us to write a beach management plan and encourage retreat from the beach to protect properties from erosion and flooding. And the Coastal Protection Overlay Zone that we incorporated in 1992 is an overlay zone that sits on top of every piece of property that touches the ocean front to control erosion, preserve and maintain a recreational beach, safeguard property and promote public safety. And for that to happen in the late 80s, early 90s is kind of forward compared to some of what we talk about today. So how did we do that? Well, we had an experience to learn from. We learned from Hurricane Hugo in 1989 that we did not want that kind of damage again. Now, granted, some of these, I'm going to go back one slide and tell you the honest truth is that the lower density zones on the ocean front lasted a few years before developers found a way around it through the plan unit development process. So that one was a success for a while, but it's not been a lasting success. However, the floodplain management regulations of the freeboard, the beach retreat from the beach setback area, and the coastal protection overlay zone have been a lasting impacts on our community. In our comprehensive plan, we recognize we live in an active tourism community in the coastal area that will be heavily impacted by rising sea levels. And our hazard mitigation and floodplain management planning efforts in 2010 and 2015 all talked about sea level rise as well, and our impacts of future conditions. In the comprehensive plan goals, it includes reducing the city's carbon footprint. Do you remember when that was the key term for having eco services talked about in your planning? And then developing a plan for the effects of sea level rise. Both of those goals are in our comprehensive plan, and we're currently in the investigation process of sea level rise impacts, where part of our intern's job this summer is to gather data to build the report on. But how did we do that? Well, to be honest, we as staff didn't. We had a comprehensive planning process that involved as many people as we could, and interspersed among those folks in the room are other subject matter experts, again, from our partnerships. We had folks from the National Estuary Reserve System as part of our Natural Resources Committee. We had folks from our county's Open Space Board. They have a board that reviews open space subdivisions. They were involved in the Natural Resources Division. We had folks from the development side, from the Green Building Council, and from other ecosystem sensitive community groups, all involved in the comprehensive planning. Anybody that ever came up to us and asked us, why didn't we do this, that, or the other in a certain way, I would take their name and I'd say, are you interested in doing that? Well, let me give you a call. We've got the comprehensive plan process coming up. Let me put you on a list of interested people on this topic, that topic, or that topic. In addition, we also gave our planning commission and our committee members literature to read along the year. And the carbon footprint discussion came from a report that I gave offhand to our planning commission vice chairwoman that came out of the New Yorker. It wasn't even a scientific journal. It was a report in the New Yorker magazine that she latched onto and carried it forward all the way through to implementation. So making sure that when you find grassroots people, that you give them information they can understand and move forward with, it's important. And so talking about from appointed officials to elected officials. I do have an elected official at one point that asked me, can't we call it storm surge? Do we have to talk about climate change? Well, with political will, helping to build that is very delicate as a staff member, but there are ways we've done it here. We talk dollars. One of the things that elected officials pay attention to is money. So wherever possible that you could turn the review that you have into an evaluation of how it will impact your community from a financial standpoint, do that. There are some really good examples out there. The city of Charlotte has a report about how much each tree in the city, each specimen of the tree in the city saves the community in stormwater by being there. The work that it does, the tree does to save, to hold water and keep it from going into the system. They've done a system-wide analysis on that. I believe it's called City Green. But it's an excellent report, and it really gave us something good to start with for discussion. There are also resources available to tell you how much money that your wetlands save in your community for storage, or how much the community is affected by jobs that rely on clean waters in the ocean fronts. If you have a working waterfront in your community, you need to pay special attention to protecting that waterfront, because that's an economic engine. So talking dollars in that, not just talking about the good that's done by preserving open space or the safety. If you can put money on it, if we have these people out of the floodplain because they've been relocated, these repetitive lost properties, then those are this many people we don't have to go in with our emergency services and save. It's this much equipment that is not mobilized in order to go into that area, and we're not putting this many staff members at risk for also getting injured. They understand that clearly. Programs that have multiple returns are also very popular. Again, we talked about programs that might have the ability to piggyback on other grant programs. If you're looking to purchase land in a flood area or a marsh area, for instance, but you don't have the ability or don't have the funds in your current programs, can you partner up with the Parks program? Can you partner up with some other conservation program or some other non-government organization? Making those programs that have multiple returns. If you have a shoreline area that is in danger and needs to be restored? Can you make a restoration project that also has a walking trail, or a just a non-pervious, or excuse me, a non-impervious? Okay, I'm tripping over my own words now. Water goes through it. How about that? Using a surface that water can go through to make sure that the stormwater system is not impacted. You can use those programs to have multiple returns on the value for your community. And then champion the good. When good decisions are made, tell everybody. Tell people what your community is doing, and brag on them. I mean, not necessarily like a proud parent per se, but if you're on social media, tout the good decisions that your city or your county or your government agency makes, and show people that that they're doing things in the right way, in the right direction. And when you have challengers, convert the challengers. Stay updated on what their challenges are and what their opinions are and where they come from. Follow your local news and social media. I don't spend a whole lot of time on Facebook these days, but there are times when I've been able to track down the conversion to make sure that I know what his concerns are, or I know what their concerns are, and then know when to pull back. You can only go so far. The community rating system, if you don't know much about the community rating system, I wanted to make sure I mention it. I don't want to go into it in depth, and I want to make sure you know that it does have a lot of value to the community. In particular, my community saves about $1 million a year, and it's not that the community saves the money, it's the constituents, and the constituents are the ones that I'm talking about because they're the ones that vote. So my mayor loves this program. He says that this program that we're doing saves you $1 million. It stays here in Myrtle Beach. There's a lot of top communities out there that will have good examples of how you can do better work. And the examples on the screen show you how much of a discount in the flood insurance premiums that your community can save. A recent estimation of savings of $3,500 per community per year for having an open space preservation activity, 1 point increase, which is phenomenal. Other benefits of the CRS is that the community is prepared to take action to protect themselves. Again, that's people you don't have to rescue. Less money spent in response costs and incentives to maintain and improve the flood programs, and less damage after an event. So resources that we use, CRS resources, if you are looking for the resources for the CRS program, the community rating system, this is the portal. It's a great source. If you're looking for information on how to get involved with no adverse impact, I believe Frank did touch base on this in his presentation. That's at floods.org. Each tool in the toolkit for no adverse impact has a new document that's been separated out into its own document there, and the year that each one is being published is on the left. Digital Coast, you can find that through Googling Digital Coast. It is housed through the Oceans website, coast.noaa.gov, and it has a lot of information on that site. Data, tools for those people that don't work with GIS regularly to visualize your hazard areas. It has training and topics online. If you're looking for information on coastal inundation, they have a whole suite of information in one area, and then case studies as well. Of course, the NHMA website has resources and publications and the disaster risk reduction curriculum, and other links that will be available when this is presented, or copies of this will be made available to you. I believe that I've run a little over. I want to make sure I go ahead and get off of here and go back to Shannon, I believe. So I apologize for the delay, and thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I just want to quickly mention the disaster risk reduction curriculum again. I mentioned there are 24 modules, and this is where they're located. And eventually, we're planning to start a credentialing program, but right now we're issuing certificates of completion per module whenever you take them. And just wanted to mention that's a possibility. And also, we just have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to do a plug for the National Hazard Mitigation Association. Again, Allison mentioned to visit their website. We have resources by topic, best practices portfolios, recommended reading. We have links, publications and studies. And Allison pointed out the book just now, Building a Roadmap to a Disaster Resilient Future, was just developed a few months ago. It contains resources, particularly for post-disaster recovery, hot off the presses. And just want to mention that the National Hazard Mitigation Association is always looking for members. There's a great opportunity to network. There's a lot of growth in this field and jobs, and a lot of experts work in NHMA, and I think it's a really good opportunity for anyone looking to go into this field or to get involved. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, it looks like we've run out of time, so we're not going to be able to answer questions today. However, Jenny Koch of the Sustainable Communities Division has come up with a great idea. I'm going to send her the questions that folks that you've been putting up on our questions page here, and she's going to kind of separate them and send them out to our panelists, and then the panelists can try to answer those questions individually to you. So with that, I guess we will close up for today. So thank you to our two divisions for sponsoring today, Hazard Mitigation, Sustainable Communities, and to today's panelists, Shannon Burke, Florence Frank, and Allison Harden. Thank you for joining us. And everyone have a great weekend. Again, this will be posted on our YouTube channel later this afternoon, and a PDF of the presentation will be available on our on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.